let's start with you. Why give up our seat at the table? The United States was part of this agreement. It was a non-binding agreement. One could argue that you didn't necessarily even have to do what was called for in the Paris Agreement in terms of reducing carbon emissions. Why walk away?
I think it was partly campaign promise and partly his basic philosophy. It was not a good deal for the American taxpayer. We're footing the bill for all of these other countries, and they're not putting their share in. So I think it was more, to make a point and get back to back it up and say, let's negotiate from a position of strength and a position that works for the American taxpayer, not necessarily from just let's renegotiate this, as he wanted us to do with a number of different things that I believe also need renegotiated.
And what's wrong with that idea, John? I mean, certainly you could go back and say, let's get a better deal for the United States, and the United States could still reduce carbon emissions. Trump says he wants clean air. We could still have clean air whether we're in the Paris Agreement or not. What's wrong with this approach?
Well, I don't see how you get a much better deal than completely voluntary. There was nothing binding in this agreement, and there was, for a very simple reason, to get 195 countries, which were the number of countries out of 197 who originally agreed to the Paris Climate Accord altogether. To go in on this, it had to be voluntary. In fact, to get the United States in on it, it had to be voluntary, because if it had been binding, it would have been a treaty that would have had to have been ratified by the Senate, and we well know that would not have happened with the Republicans in charge. And that's another really important point I think needs to be stressed here. This decision is not purely a Trump decision. While another Republican president wouldn't necessarily have done something so offensive to the rest of the world community as to actually begin the process of withdrawing the United States from the Paris Agreement, opposition to climate action is a core tenet of the modern Republican Party. It wasn't always so, but over the last 10 years, the Republican Party has made it so. So back to the question of why is this bad? First of all, it's fundamentally anti-science to oppose climate action. The World Scientific Academies, the world's professional scientific organizations, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, all agree both that we have a serious problem, we're causing it, at least the primary cause of it, and it's serious enough that we need to act. And it's really immoral. Even if Trump was not misleading the American public about the consequences of being in this agreement, which he is, it still would be, in terms even he should be able to understand, a very bad deal. The worst deal in the history of humanity, to trade some jobs now for a climate catastrophe 20, 30, 40 years and ongoing.
Two of our commenters, a commenter named John and a commenter named Chris, note, and you touched on this also, that under the agreement, China and India are allowed to continue along with their emissions without making major reductions for a number of years, while the U.S. is required to make emissions reductions sooner. And they kind of raise the point of fairness. And I mean, why would we want to be in a deal where China and India continue to pollute and the U.S. has more stringent restrictions?
Well, let's flip that on its head. What is fair? The United States got to be one of the richest countries in the world by burning these fossil fuels that are the primary cause of the problem. Now we're rich. Is it fair for us to say to these other countries that have not yet become rich, oh, we did it, but you guys can't do it. You guys have to stay in your current condition, and we won't even help you avoid dirty energy. We won't help you transition to clean energy, which is what the Green Climate Fund, in part, that Trump excoriated during his speech on this in the Rose Garden, was set up to do. So fairness, it's entirely the opposite, if you ask me. We are in a position to do this because we're wealthy, and we got wealthy by being a primary cause of the problem.
So you're saying that it should be on the taxpayer's back to take care of this?
It's not on the taxpayer's back. What it's on is on the convincing industries that it's time to move off of fossil fuels and towards clean energy. I mean, Trump talked about this Green Climate Fund as if it would be funded by the U.S. taxpayers. What it does is it mobilizes funding from both public, which means government, including the U.S. and other countries, and the private sector, which I know Republicans love the private sector. and mobilizing that funding to reach a level of $100 billion per year by 2020 and going forward. That's not all coming from the U.S. taxpayer. It's not funded by the U.S.
I'm interested too, Mark, in the argument the President made and others have made about saving jobs, particularly coal jobs. Those are going away no matter what happens with the Paris Accords,
I think you
aren't
might
they? I
be
mean,
right
yeah.
to some extent.
I mean, it's kind of a false hope almost a little bit that if we get out of Paris, suddenly all these sort of, more polluting jobs.
Well, I don't know that anybody believes we're going to get out of this and it's going to massively, awesomely fix our economy. I don't think anybody.
You mean the Paris deal?
Right. Yes.
That would not be
the
the main reason for supporting withdrawing is economics. Is that what you're saying?
I think it's a factor, but I don't think it's probably the main factor. I think personally I don't believe that 97% of the scientists in the country or in the world believe global warming is settled science.
Right.
So
I reject that outright.
Go ahead.
But
I'm sorry.
So do you think that we should just continue to put carbon into the air with impunity? I mean, should we not be taking any steps to reduce emissions?
No, I think we are taking steps to reduce emissions. I think we have done a great job with that. We continue to do a good job with that, and we will continue to do that, regardless of this climate accord or being a part of this climate accord or not. I think this withdrawing from the climate accord is simply to put everyone on notice that we want a little better deal than we've been getting out of this, and there isn't anything wrong with doing that.
Yeah, there is some signs, aren't there, John, that we are taking steps independent of the Paris Accords to reduce emissions. A lot of conversions from coal to natural gas.
Right.
Even in Missouri, there's an effort to do that. The mileage on automobiles, pollution control. I mean, some of the steps that the Accord was supposed to force us to are actually taking place anyway, which again begs the question of why you need an international agreement to do what you would do the right thing, in essence, which you're already doing.
So one of the factors in the reduction in U.S. emissions is the fracking boom that produced so much more natural gas, brought the price down. That's mainly what's killing coal now, and that's not likely to change unless Trump wants to kill the natural gas industry.
Right, but you're not a fan of fracking, are you?
I am not a fan of fracking, but that's a separate question from whether or not this will preserve coal jobs.
But it also shows how complicated this
It
issue
is
is, right?
absolutely
Because
complicated.
you say,
It is
okay, well,
absolutely
we'll go to
complicated.
natural gas, but you have to use a very controversial, I mean, we wrote about this. It's very complicated.
Yeah, and we don't have time to get into that one probably today. But then the other factor is the dramatic reductions in the costs of solar panels, of wind turbines. Solar in particular has come down something like 80% over the last 8, 9, 10 years. I forget what it is exactly. So it's becoming much more affordable for utilities and homeowners and businesses to be putting up their own equipment like this. But the fact of the matter is that much of what we were going to do to reduce emissions going forward, Trump also intends to stop, like the Clean Power Plan, like rolling back the improvements in corporate average fuel economy for standards for efficiency of vehicles, essentially, and anything else he's basically said that the Obama administration had put in place to reduce emissions, he's planning to undo.
I mean, this seems like such a global problem. It seems kind of symbolic and ultimately fruitless for your group, for the mayor, for the city council to take some stand on such a global problem.
Well, it's not fruitless because if nothing else, whatever the actual emissions reductions that occur from it, if nothing else, it sends a social cue, a social signal about what we value and what we think needs to happen.
And that's more important than any climate agreement, isn't it?
That is the most important thing, is because we are inherently social animals, and we have to change the social climate if we're going to change things. I'm very proud of Mayor James for being one of 248 climate mayors who have publicly stated that they will uphold, honor, and carry forward with the Paris Agreement, regardless of what Donald Trump and his administration have decided to do, and frankly, what Republican leaders in Congress have endorsed.
You wouldn't disagree with that, would you? That if
No,
individuals want to... So
Absolutely.
we've got an agreement here on Facebook Live over this contentious issue that individuals have some role in all this,
Absolutely.
too. Yeah.
All of us have a role.
Yeah.
And it's interesting enough that some of the people who yell the loudest have not taken on their own personal responsibility. They still drive large gas guzzling cars and live in large homes.